This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow. No, it's not. I'm just fooling you. Stay safe and enjoy the video.
In the Tuskeegee Experiment, 399 of 600 African American sharecroppers were left untreated to study the effects of syphilis and its long-term effects from 1932 to 1972.
The wannabe rocker didn't even bother to get to his feet. He curled up into himself as much as he could. The nerd knelt by him, but couldn't think of anything to say. It didn't really matter. Anything anybody could say would only make things worse. Andrew knew this all too well. The best thing for everyone would be shut up and focus on the military.
They're the big threat around here. We would tear ourselves apart, but what they would do to us?
Andrew shook images of glass rooms and gurneys with restraints built into them from his mind. Andrew looked from person to person. The fatty had moved back towards the jock's corpse. Little Miss Next Door was zoned out in an almost catatonic state. Miss Princess kept looking at the Mexicano's body with a knife buried up to his chest. The social butterfly looked out the window, desperate to focus on something other than the man's inhumanity.
This is who we are.
A thought went through Andrew's mind. Someone had to claim the knife. Andrew spoke.
Who gets the knife?
The nerd's head snapped up, and the look he gave him could have curdled milk. Little Miss Next Door answered,
No one. I'm going to throw it out the window.
She approached the knife, but realized that retrieving it would involve pulling it out of the corpse. The fat girl snapped.
Don't be foolish. We need to establish some sort of order, and that knife is the best enforcer we have.
The slacker said, I don't know what kind of totalitarian regime you're planning here. The wannabe rocker interrupted. They're right. Silence filled the room as they hung onto his words like a sinking ship in the ocean. He continued. We can't keep going on like this. We'll tear each other apart. Andrew approached the body and said triumphantly,
Then it's decided.
He reached for the butterfly knife when Lou interrupted him.
You won't be the one with the knife.
Well, I sure as shit don't trust the knife to the guy who just murdered the previous owner.
The nerd spoke in almost a whisper.
We vote who gets the knife.
Andrew Wakefield and Lou Pasteur were unanimously excluded in the vote. Harriet argued a strong case that Jonas should get the knife, as he was currently the most level-headed in the group, but he refused. The ever-shrinking survivors broke into petty infighting to decide ownership of the knife before the slacker uncharacteristically took charge of the situation. Joseph Meister slammed his hand into a nearby desk and spoke. I'll take the damn thing. The class decided that Joseph was the best choice. He was perfect for the job. He was on friendly terms with most of the class, and he was clearly the most laid back. Those two qualities were necessary for whoever would have the knife. Everyone assumed Joey was the least likely to threaten someone with the knife. Once he had everyone's support, he began the cruel task of reclaiming it from its original owner. He knelt by Geraldo's corpse and put his hand on his shoulder. His voice cracked when he said, I'm sorry for this. He jerked the butterfly knife out of his chest. It tore out of the wound with a wet, lewd sound. He closed the knife and put it in his back pocket. Having decided, the survivors moved to another classroom and ate a meal. It seemed that the classrooms on the third floor were quickly filling up with the dead or shit. Joseph tried to start a conversation and engage the other students, but was met with silence. They had just finished off the last of their reserves, and without the military's intervention, they would starve. They all went to bed knowing the foolishness of that hope. When they would wake up, they would find that Joseph Meister had disappeared. She's got a killer's grin, or maybe I'm just too dead to know. Lou woke up to the sound of Andrew Wakefield cursing. He stood up and stretched. Some of the other students were already awake, and the rest of them were waking up. Jennifer sat on the shelf and looked out of the window at the barricade that had stripped them of their freedom. Andrew kicked a chair and unleashed another volley of swears, some of which Lou had never heard used in conjunction before. He rubbed the sleep out of his eyes and asked, What's got your goat? Andrew fumed.
Son of a bitch slacker flew the coop. No one can find him.
Eddie was the voice of reason.
He couldn't have left the barricade. He's still here. He probably just took a walk.
Andrew snapped back.
We fucked up trusting him with the knife. He's probably lost it and is planning on slitting our throats in our sleep. That's absurd. Joseph is a good guy.
Andrew continued to whip up hysteria.
I don't trust him, and anyone that does belongs on a short bus with a helmet.
Lou interrupted. Instead of bickering like a bunch of kids, why don't we all go looking for him? He's probably taking a smoking break somewhere. They broke up into 3 groups. Lou, Edward, and Jonas agreed to search the first floor. Harriet and Jennifer were paired up to check the second floor. That left Andrew and Michaela to look around on the 3rd floor. Neither seemed happy to be paired up with one another, but due to their personalities, it wasn't too far-fetched to assume why no one was scrambling to search for Joseph Meister with either of them. They all left to begin their search. Lou, Edward, and Jonas walked through the hallways first. They completed a circuit before moving into the classrooms. They didn't turn up any signs of him. Lou asked, "What do you think he's doing?"
Probably smoking,
Eddie responded.
He only has a few left from what I saw. Could be rationing them. Nicotine withdrawal is not fun.
Just as they were about to abandon the search, they found Joey in the boys' bathroom. He had been stabbed multiple times and had bled out on the bathroom floor. A half-smoked, now extinguished cigarette lay a few feet away. Lou sank to his knees whilst Eddie checked for a pulse. He already knew that Eddie would find no pulse, due to the amount of blood pooling on the floor. He asked in a quivering voice,
Did he kill himself?
Jonas knelt by the body, and after a few seconds of examination answered,
Murder. Judging from the multiple stab wounds, the fact that he didn't finish his cigarette, and also the knife is missing.
Upon hearing those words, Lou had a sudden feeling of unease about his other classmates. One of them had murdered someone in cold blood, and that person now had a butterfly knife. The 3 students were silent for a moment. Lou wished he could cry, but found that he couldn't. He hoped that it was the shock of seeing the body of one of his close friends, or that he was so emotionally drained from his experience that he couldn't weep. But he knew that wasn't the case. Lou couldn't cry because he knew that this would most likely not be the last corpse he saw in his life. Edward Jenner was the first to break the silence.
What do we tell the others?
Lou spoke first.
We tell them the truth. Jonas, when I tell the others, keep an eye on them. Someone is going to show signs of a guilty conscience. We have to find out who has the knife. They've killed once. They may kill again. Is that really the best thing to do?
It's the only thing we can do.
His outburst surprised even him. They stood over the corpse of Joseph Meister for a few minutes before another question crossed their minds.
What do we do with his body?
Once again, the musician was the first to speak.
We move him out into the parking lot, or we bury him behind the school. And the soldiers may fire on us.
Lou punched a stall door and dented it.
God damn it!
He growled. Jonas drew the other's attention and pointed up. Eddie got the implication and asked,
Move him into the second-floor classroom.
Lou had wanted to do something vaguely ceremonial to honor his friend, but he realized that to go outside would spell trouble with the soldiers, and to leave him in the bathroom was extremely disrespectful. He nodded his reluctant approval. They moved Joseph's corpse into the second floor. Lou tried his best not to look at the bodies of the other students whom had looked like they had perished in pain, bleeding from every orifice and choking on their own blood. He failed to ignore the corpses and found himself glancing in a macabre manner at their grisly end that he may one day share. Jonas, Lou, and Edward then proceeded upstairs to break the news to the others. The other students received the news sullenly. Lou found himself slightly aggravated that no one wept over the news of his friend's death. They all just listened with their eyes glazed over and their faces blank. He let go of his anger when he realized that even he was unable to weep over finding his friend's corpse. Andrew tried to initiate mandatory searches to find out who had the knife now, but most were apathetic, and the idea was passed over. The remaining students, Lou, Jonas, Jennifer, Edward, Michaela, Harriet, and Andrew, spent the rest of the day in relative silence. Some spent the day in silent introspection of their lives, whilst others cast spurious glances at the other students, hoping to find out whom was the murderer. The hours passed slowly and uneventfully. At the end of the day, they all went to bed. This was the first day where all of them went to bed without having eaten anything at all. They had finished off the stockpiled food and snacks. Some of the more realistic students realized that this would not be the last day that they went to bed without having anything to eat.
That's life. If nothing else, it's real. And sometimes it fucking hurts when it's sort of all we have.
It wasn't until a few days later that Michaela developed the cough. At first, she told the other classmates that it was allergies and nothing more. She didn't believe that it was allergies. Deep down, she knew what it really was, but to admit it would mean certain death, so she kept coughing and talking about her seasonal allergies. The other students watched her, some with blank, vacant stares, and others with judgmental and accusation in their eyes. The past few days had been spent in malaise. No one had eaten anything since the discovery of Joseph's body. Their supply had been used up, and the military had not brought in any rations or supplies for them. Most spent their days lying on the floor, trying to conserve energy. Only Jenny and Jonas really seemed to do anything interesting. Jenny looked out of the window at the army and at the barricade, whilst Jonas left the classroom for a few hours at a time, only to return and lay back down on the tile floor. Michaela Mary Richards spent most of her days lying on the ground with a backpack as her pillow, thinking about how her father was going to tear into the generals and corporals that were running the barricade. She quickly realized that her father wasn't going to do jack shit, couldn't do jack shit. She coughed a few more times and slowly let her fatalistic attitude take her over. It wasn't until the third day that her coughing began to attract negative attention from the others. By now, she was coughing up a brackish phlegm. She was sore all over and felt unnecessarily tired. After every coughing fit, she heard the others whisper about the infection and the symptoms. It wasn't until the end of the day, when she coughed up and hacked a reddish phlegm, that Andrew Wakefield called her out. He grabbed her by the skirt and hauled her onto her feet. She stared at him with feverish eyes. He spoke, but the words seemed to echo.
Infected.
She shook her head hard. She felt her brain rattle inside her head. She looked at the space between Andrew and exhaustedly huffed.
Fine. I'm fine.
He slammed her back against something and growled.
Bullshit!
She felt like she was crying and drooling, but she knew that wasn't right. She didn't need to look at a mirror to know what was leaking down her face, judging from the other students' cries of shock and horror. She was infected. She was probably bleeding from her eyes and ears, but at this point, she was too far gone to care. Andrew shouted something, but she was beyond caring. Andrew slammed her against the glass again, and for the first time in a few days, Michaela experienced a moment of clarity. She looked around at the horrified students. Andrew snarled.
Make peace with your God.
The world seemed so clear.
I'm an atheist. Well, then it'll be easy.
She heard someone shout, "Don't do it." The instigator kicked her square in the stomach. It should have hurt, but she felt very little. She felt the glass behind her shatter and tinkle to the ground. She felt weightlessness and the air rushing out of her body. For a brief moment, she felt at peace with the world, and then she struck the ground. The impact jarred her bones and sent her brain bouncing around in her skull. She died before she could really make sense of any of it.
I'm hungry. Feed me. I'm bored. Amuse me.
Days had passed since Michaela's death, and every day Jennifer told herself that this was the last day she could bear. Each day the hollowness and hunger compounded and grew exponentially within her like a fast-multiplying cancer. She wasn't completely sure how much time had passed. She thought it was 3 days, but that seemed like a conservative guess to her. It felt like weeks. Every night before she went to bed, she told herself that tomorrow was the day she would end it. She would then wake up the next day and do her best to conserve her energy. She woke up on her last day feeling feverish and slightly giddy. She stood up and went to look at her reflection in the glass. She had to push her face close to the window to see her face in the clear glass. Her eyes had dark bags around them, and she looked perpetually tired. What was worse was the fact that she could see her cheekbones. It was enough to push her over the edge. She decided that today would be the end for her. She had heard about the rule of threes. A person could live 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. They never calculated how long someone could live without hope. She calmly slid open the window. She didn't want any pain. She had suffered enough. When Michaela had gone out of the window, she died almost instantly when she impacted the ground. Jennifer sat on the ledge and looked outwards at the barricade. The soldiers watched her through the fence. They watched her with interest. She quietly wished that the biological weapons that they were all infected with were more virulent. She would have loved nothing more than to charge the fence and spit in their faces. She would love to have settled the score. Just as she was preparing to lean forward, a voice spoke. "Jennifer, what are you doing?" She craned her head back to look at Lou. "What does it look like?" "Don't do this."
We're not getting rescued from this. They're going to watch us die. They don't want any of this getting out.
Andrew spoke like he was trying to be nonchalant.
I figured the genius was going to outlive us all, and not just due to all the built-up reserves of fat.
Shut up!
He spoke calmly, but it seemed like a line of tension ran through his words.
Why don't you come back into the classroom and make me shut up?
Jenny groaned.
Do you think I'm stupid enough to come back into the classroom so you can restrain me? I just want this to end. We're going to die here. I just want the express ticket.
She gestured to the remaining students. Lou edged towards her while she was distracted. She ranted.
Glad you're paying attention because I have some things I want to tell you all. I wanted to let you know my true feelings for so long, so here it goes.
The remaining students looked at her numbly as she began to vent vitriol and revulsion on them. Jennifer spun around so she could face them all. She pointed at Harriet and spoke.
Little Miss Perfect, you think you can get by life with just your good looks? God, you're foolish.
She pointed a trembling finger at Andrew, and he actually stepped back as if she had shot him.
You are nothing but a shit stirrer. You killed Patrick and Michaela. Are 2 deaths enough to satiate you, or will you be satisfied by killing us all?
Edward was next.
You know it all. I hope you're smart enough to realize how fucked we all are.
She howled at Jonas.
It should have been you! You should have died instead of him!
She snarled at Lou.
And you're the worst! A popular kid that acts like he gives a shit about us. But in reality, a cliquey exclusionist. Fuck you for trying to give us hope in a hopeless situation.
She leaned back to fall from the window, but Lou jumped forward and caught her by the arm. Lou gritted his teeth and shouted, "Help me out of here! I can't hold it for long!" Andrew turned away. After what she'd said, he didn't care what happened to her. Harriet started forward to help Lou pull her back into the classroom, but something stopped her dead in her tracks. Jennifer's free hand slid into her front right pocket and pulled out the butterfly knife. She began to open it with her free hand, hoping to use it to extricate herself from Lou's grasp. Jennifer watched the realization play across Lou's face as she said, "I did it. He thought I was just keeping him company whilst he smoked. I needed that." She let out a surprised cry as Lou let go of her hand and watched her plummet 3 floors down to the ground below. The realization that Mr. Popularity had let her go dawned on her as she fell. The butterfly knife hit the ground, and she quickly followed after it. It felt like she had been hit by an incredibly strong wave. She regained consciousness after some time. It was the sounds of shouting that woke her up. They sounded urgent. At first she thought it was the other students, but as her mind cleared, she realized that they were coming from her left. She turned her head to the side and looked at the barricade. The soldiers were running around and some were shouting. She saw one raise a rifle and fire a few rounds. Are they rebelling? Was there some internal strife that they don't know about? She watched them for a few minutes. Some were fleeing, others were firing, while a few were returning fire. It was chaos. The soldiers abandoning their posts meant something. She wanted to puzzle over it some more, but a sudden blinding pain began in her chest. She bent her neck to look at her body. There was a rib bone sticking out of her chest. Blood trickled out of the hole. One leg was bent at an odd angle, and it looked like there was a lumpy mass within her leg that she quickly realized was her bone. A sudden lightheadedness swept over her. Jennifer wanted to sit up, but felt too woozy to manage that. Her breathing was shallow, and that led her to assume when her rib had broken, it had pierced her lung. She had wanted it to be a quick, painless death. When Michaela went, it was almost instantaneous. She had twitched spasmodically on the asphalt for a few seconds before stilling. Her face had looked so confused as she hadn't known what was happening. Why hadn't it happened to her? She listened to the soldiers screaming and shooting for a few minutes before the feeling of dizziness returned. She coughed, and wasn't surprised when a little bit of blood came up with the hacking fit. She reassured herself that it was the injury she had sustained from the fall and not the onset of the infection. She laughed at that simple and stupid reassurance. It didn't really matter. She was fucked either way. That thought made her laugh harder. She contorted into a manic ball of laughing at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. It hurts so bad to laugh, but I can't stop. She wasn't sure when the laugh became sobbing. Jennifer wept uncontrollably as the shock set in. She died as the soldiers escaped and embraced the end around her.